Tonight, executive orders. President Obama orders the shutdown of the Guantanamo Bay prison camp and secret CIA prisons overseas. And he bans torture. I'm Katie Couric. Also tonight, how the mighty are falling. Big money power brokers turned mini Madoffs, fleeing financial meltdown. Caroline Kennedy abruptly drops out of the running for a U.S. Senate seat. But why? And sworn in secrecy, fixing the flub behind closed doors.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
And good evening, everyone. President Obama's pen is getting quite a workout in his first days in the White House. He's using it just as he said he would to undo what he believes his predecessor did wrong, dealing with terrorism and more. The new chief executive issued a series of executive orders today, as our chief White House correspondent Chip Reed reports.
With the stroke of a pen, President Obama reversed some of the Bush administration's most controversial policies in the war on terrorism. Signing executive orders closing the Guantanamo Bay prison within a year, shuttering the CIA's overseas prisons, and banning harsh interrogation tactics.
We can abide by a rule that says we don't torture.
Mr. Obama said he's sending a message to the world that the United States will vigilantly prosecute the struggle against terrorism.
And we are going to do so in a manner that is consistent with our values and our ideals. We intend to win this fight. We're going to win it on our terms.
A key player in the war on terrorism, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton got a hero's welcome as she arrived for her first day on the job.
So this is going to be a great adventure. We'll have some ups and some downs.
That's exactly what she did later in the day, joining the president to announce that 2 experienced diplomats will be top envoys to world hotspots. Former State Department official Richard Holbrooke will oversee Afghanistan and Pakistan. Former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell will lead the effort on Middle East peace.
We will always support Israel's right to defend itself.
Turning from foreign policy, Mr. Obama met again with his economic team, a meeting that the White House now says will happen every day. But absent again was the point person on the economic recovery, Timothy Geithner. His confirmation as Treasury Secretary has been held up by his failure to pay $34,000 in taxes. A confirmation vote could come as early as Monday. The president got some good news today. He's allowed to keep his ever-present BlackBerry. Security will be upgraded to keep hackers and foreign governments from reading his emails, and only a small number of top aides and close friends will be given his email address.
How are you all?
The announcement was made by Press Secretary Robert Gibbs at his standing room only debut as White House briefer.
He believes it's a way of keeping in touch with folks, a way of doing it outside of getting stuck in a bubble.
Gibbs also said the Obama family is settling in well at their new home.
I know yesterday he, between 2 events, went upstairs to have dinner with them, and I think that obviously means a lot to him as a father.
Late today, the president surprised the press corps with an unannounced visit to the briefing room.
I just want to thank everybody for, not just completely ripping up Gibbs.
During the president's tour of the press area, he was, not surprisingly, mobbed by cameras every inch of the way. When he saw our vending machine, he said, "You've got to get some healthier snacks back here, guys." Back on the news front, tomorrow he will turn back to the economy. There's going to be a meeting here at the White House with congressional leadership to discuss that $825 billion economic stimulus package. Katie?
Chip Reed. Chip, thank you. Meanwhile, the mere mention of Guantanamo Bay causes sharp reactions pro and con, and the arguments will continue long after the 250 remaining prisoners are moved out of the camp on the U.S. naval base at the eastern tip of Cuba. David Martin takes a look back at the controversial prison for terror suspects.
Even with America's blood still boiling over the 9/11 attacks, the first photos of hooded and shackled prisoners being shipped to Guantanamo Bay came as a shock. All told, nearly 800 alleged terrorists, the so-called worst of the worst, were sent to Guantanamo.
These aren't common criminals or bystanders accidentally swept up on the battlefield.
That was the justification for Guantanamo. And it's an exaggeration, according to Matthew Waxman, a former Pentagon official in charge of detainee affairs.
I wouldn't say they were the worst of the worst. Were some people brought to Guantanamo extremely dangerous? Absolutely. But were some people brought to Guantanamo who never should have been detained in the first place? Yeah, I think so too as well.
Some, like this Canadian suspected of throwing a grenade which killed an American soldier, were juveniles at the time. His interrogation is the only one to see the light of day. They were to be tried for war crimes, but could be held indefinitely even if found innocent.
Even in a case where an enemy combatant might be acquitted, the United States would be irresponsible not to continue to detain them until the conflict is over.
Guantanamo Bay, which has a unique status as American territory on foreign soil, was chosen for a very specific legal reason.
Place the facility and the detainees outside of the full reach of U.S. constitutional protections.
The inmates were not considered prisoners of war protected by the Geneva Convention.
If you want to interrogate detainees more aggressively, so the thinking went, you needed to find ways around those limitations of the Geneva Conventions.
Rumsfeld once called allegations of torture utter nonsense. But the chief legal officer for Guantanamo now says one prisoner, Mohammed al-Qahtani, was tortured. As a result, Susan Crawford has refused to prosecute the man believed to have been the 20th hijacker on 9/11. In 7 years, the military commission set up to try the worst of the worst have produced just 3 convictions.
The military commission's process has so far been a failure. It was created in order to provide both fair but swift justice, and so far it hasn't met either of those tests.
In the end, Katie, it was hard to tell which posed the greater threat, terrorists at Guantanamo or the damage it's done to America's image. Katie?
David Martin at the Pentagon. Thank you so much, David. In other news, federal investigators say they'll need another day or two to recover the left engine of the U.S. Airways jetliner that went down in New York last week. Tonight, though, there are 2 new videotapes of what happened on the Hudson River that day. The first, taken from the Intrepid Museum, shows the jet splashing down, actually skimming along the river before stopping. The second, from a camera on a Manhattan building, shows emergency chutes deploying just seconds after the emergency landing. Half a minute later, passengers were standing on the wings waiting for help. The first ferry boat arrived less than 4 minutes after the plane went down. All 155 people on board survived. Turning to politics now, and Caroline Kennedy's surprise decision overnight. She told the governor of New York she no longer wants to be considered for the Senate seat Hillary Clinton just gave up. But tonight, as Kelly Wallace reports, the big question is, why?
While reporters camped in front of her Park Avenue apartment, Caroline Kennedy remained out of sight, only fueling the mystery about why she suddenly pulled out of her bid for the Clinton seat at the 11th hour. A Kennedy aide who did not want to be identified told CBS News that yesterday afternoon, Caroline Kennedy was, quote, made aware of a personal situation that was occurring that does not have anything to do with her uncle, Senator Ted Kennedy, who's suffering from brain cancer and who had a seizure Tuesday at the inaugural luncheon. A source close to Caroline Kennedy says the personal reasons are, quote, serious and something only she and her immediate family really know. Aides said Caroline Kennedy called New York Governor David Paterson to withdraw yesterday afternoon, and the governor asked her to reconsider for 24 hours. That led to a night of what one paper dubbed Caroline chaos. Mixed messages about whether she was in or out.
Nobody knew what was happening. Everybody was calling. Nobody knew anything.
One aide said Kennedy called the governor last night between 10 and 11 with her decision, and disputed reports she backed out because Paterson was not going to choose her.
Her first rule of running a professional campaign is be clear with the media. They never did that through any part of this effort.
And I'd be honored to be considered.
Her political debut got off to a rocky start and never quite recovered. Paterson, all along, never showed his hand.
And to be fair to the other candidates, we have some extraordinary people in New York.
Top contenders to replace Hillary Clinton include New York Attorney General Andrew Cuomo and Congresswoman Kirsten Gillibrand. Paterson will announce his decision tomorrow. Kelly Wallace, CBS News, New York.
On the CBS News Money Watch tonight, the recession is catching up with Microsoft. Profits are down, and today the software giant announced its first big layoffs ever. 5,000 jobs will be cut. Microsoft employs 94,000 people overall. Meanwhile, another Wall Street CEO lost his job today, but not before he made sure his top executives got billions in bonuses, even as his failing company was being taken over. Anthony Mason has that story.
Financial markets go in cycles.
So do CEOs. John Thain was ousted as head of Merrill Lynch today, pushed out by Bank of America CEO Ken Lewis, after, in the diplomatic language of corporate executions, it was mutually agreed that his situation was not working out. Bank of America agreed to buy the troubled Merrill last September. But as losses escalated at the country's biggest brokerage, soaring to $41 billion last year, Thain paid out $4 billion in company bonuses just days before the merger went through.
It's one thing to share the wealth, but this is taking wealth when there are huge losses, and Bank of America has to explain this to Congress.
That won't be easy. Bank of America just got $20 billion in bailout money to help offset the losses at Merrill Lynch.
If that's the accurate set of events, it is completely unacceptable.
Early last year, Thain also reportedly spent nearly $1.25 million redecorating his office, hiring the Obama's decorator, Michael Smith, whose expenses included an $87,000 area rug and a $35,000 commode on legs.
Don't have one of those, so I can't tell you what it is. But those embarrassing decorating details leaked out just hours before Thain agreed to resign. Bank of America didn't just show him the door, Katie. They slammed it behind him.
All right, Anthony, when you find out what it is, will you let me know? Thanks very much. Meanwhile, prison bars could slam behind an Indiana businessman accused of trying to fake his own death. It's becoming a trend, so-called fugitive financiers attempting to skip town after losing big for investors. Here's Bob Orr.
Marcus Schrenker, accused of bilking investors out of millions, today pleaded not guilty to charges he deliberately crashed his plane to fake his death. But all of the evidence suggests Schrenker tried to flee financial ruins, and he's not alone. Facing 20 years in prison for running a $450 million scam, Samuel Israel also reached for a desperate way out. He scrawled a suicide message on his SUV, left parked on a Hudson River bridge. Israel turned himself in 3 weeks later. Now, a Florida hedge fund manager, Arthur Nadell, is on the run, leaving behind his own suicide note and investors who are on the hook for $50 million in losses.
We're going to see a lot more of this. We're going to see a lot of people just taking off and disappearing in the middle of the night.
Clinical psychologist Leslie Sapini says the scale of the worldwide money meltdown is causing a collective emotional depression. And the wealthiest money managers and clients, especially men, may be under the most stress. In just the last month, at least 5 financial power brokers have killed themselves, victims of what Forbes magazine calls econocides. Among them, French financier René Thierry Delavilliers, who slit his wrists after losing $1.5 billion of his clients' money in the Bernard Madoff Ponzi scheme. German tycoon Adolf Merkel, who threw himself under a train after watching a $9 billion fortune evaporate. And Irish property baron Patrick Rocca, who, facing a collapsing real estate market, shot himself in the head.
It's that shame that goes with the loss of power that leads to suicidal behavior and feeling that there's absolutely no way out.
Millions of people facing the same financial crisis are somehow finding ways to cope, but there's plenty of suffering, and too often it seems yet another person turns to desperate measures. Bob Orr, CBS News, Washington.
And coming up next, right here on the CBS Evening News, was it a war crime? Israel's accused of using a horrific new weapon against Hamas. Hamas gave a thumbs down to President Obama today, saying his Middle East policy is no different from President Bush's. Hamas just ended a bloody war with Israel in Gaza, and tonight there is growing evidence the Israelis may have used a banned weapon. Some even accuse them of war crimes. From Gaza, here's Alan Pizzi.
These images are part of what Amnesty International calls indisputable proof the Israeli military illegally used white phosphorus in Gaza. The smoke-producing and incendiary chemical is banned in civilian areas because of its intense heat and fumes. The Israelis admit firing 200 white phosphorus shells, but deny breaking international law. The last bombing raid here was a week ago. The area is littered with pieces of shrapnel and bits of sticky, gummy brown material like this. Rub it, it bursts into flame and emits an acrid smoke. distinct characteristics, experts say, of white phosphorus. Saba Halima's hands are an example of the kind of wound white phosphorus inflicts.
In ours, it becomes much deeper and much wider. Plus, smoke comes out from the wound.
The UN Refugee Agency says white phosphorus hit its warehouse in the city center.
I think our people have said if it looks like white phosphorus, if it acts like white phosphorus, it must be white phosphorus.
Jody Clark risked her life to pull a burning shell from under a fuel tanker.
I ran to the workshops, another shell landed probably 30 metres in front of me, and then just fireworks burst up from the ground and sprayed pellets of a burning substance all over the place.
This is part of one of the shells.
The fire extinguisher didn't put it out. It continued to burn, and in fact when we went back an hour later to fight the rest of the fire, it was still burning.
The Israelis have ordered an inquiry, but human rights groups are calling for an international investigation. Alan Pizzi, CBS News, Gaza City.
And coming up next, show them the money. Hospitals demanding proof you can pay before they'll treat you. They're the underinsured, the growing number of Americans who have insurance but still pay dearly for treatment. About 25 million are spending more than 10% of their income on medical expenses, and that's up 60% in 4 years because, as Hari Srinivasan reports, medical providers are protecting themselves.
53-year-old Lisa Kelly is fighting leukemia. For the past 2 years, she has also been fighting to pay for treatment.
It wears you out. It just takes everything out of you.
Lisa was underinsured. When she was still healthy, she purchased a limited benefit plan marketed by the AARP. With $37,000 of annual hospital coverage, she thought it would at least get her in the door at MD Anderson, a leading cancer center. But they told her it was not enough. So Lisa cashed in some of her husband's inheritance and came in with a check for $45,000. When her test showed she needed immediate cancer treatment, the hospital asked for another $60,000 to admit her that day.
I just gave you $45,000. Do you carry that kind of, that's it. That's all I got on me.
Lisa Kelly's situation is not unique. 4,200 of the nation's 4,900 hospitals are beginning to require proof of payment up front for non-emergency needs, meaning if it is care you can schedule, the hospital wants to know how you will pay for it. They cite the rising costs of uncompensated care. In 1997, hospitals provided $18.5 billion worth of care without pay. By 2007, that number has almost doubled to $34 billion. Rich Umdenstock of the American Hospital Association says hospitals are in a very tough position. He sees lots of plans like Lisa Kelly's, which may be enough to cover the cost of a broken bone, but fall far short when it comes to catastrophic illnesses.
The patient has purchased the plan, the insurer has issued the plan, but a lot of times it falls to the hospital to explain that plan.
Lisa paid $187 a month for a plan that severely restricted the type of care covered versus buying full health coverage that would have cost her 2 to 3 times as much. Senator Chuck Grassley's office has been investigating how some limited benefit plans are marketed. He asked Lisa Kelly to testify before Congress.
Wouldn't you expect when you buy something that is referred to as health security that you would think that you were getting a pretty good product?
The AARP stopped marketing the plan purchased by Lisa, but there are still an estimated 1 million people who are holding similar policies.
Knowing your insurance and what it costs you alone is just devastating. Much less knowing you have an illness that'll kill you.
By using her family's life savings, Lisa has already paid more than $100,000 out of pocket, and she still owes $137,000 more. Hari Srinivasan, CBS News, Clute, Texas.
They didn't get it quite right on Inauguration Day, so the president and the Chief Justice have done a take 2 on the swearing-in ceremony.
Are you prepared to take the oath, Senator?
I am.
But Chief Justice John Roberts wasn't all that prepared to administer it on Tuesday.
That I will execute the office of President to the United States faithfully.
That I will execute
faithfully the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States faithfully.
Later, Roberts told the president, "My bad." And last night, he went to the White House to make it right. And with no news cameras allowed in,
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
it's a keeper.
President of the United States.
Back in 1929, Chief Justice Taft misspoke at the inauguration of Herbert Hoover.
That you will preserve, maintain, and defend.
It's preserve, protect, and defend. Alerted to the error by a sharp-eared 8th grader, Taft blamed an old man's bad memory and said the oath was still valid.
So help you God?
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
The White House says President Obama's first swearing in was valid as well, but decided a do-over was in order out of, quote, an abundance of caution. So hail to the Chief and the Chief Justice. That is the CBS Evening News for tonight. I'm Katie Couric. Thank you for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.